If in the past few days, the world was still debating whether Donald Trump would risk sending troops to strike Iran once again, everything has now suddenly flipped in the opposite direction. What looked like hesitation and political guessing has turned into a shocking shift that no one was prepared for. A wave of disbelief has hit Western intelligence circles, like a sudden splash of ice-cold water across the face of those who thought they understood the balance of power. Iran, a country that has long been described in Western media as weakened, isolated, and struggling under heavy sanctions, has now been pulled into the center of a far more serious global reality. Reports emerging through intelligence channels suggest something that changes the entire equation. According to leaked assessments and satellite analysis, Iran is now believed to possess multiple nuclear warheads, with estimates ranging from 3 to 5 fully developed units. This is not a minor development, and it has sent immediate shockwaves through the Middle East and beyond, leaving governments and agencies in a state of confusion and concern. What makes this situation even more unsettling is the question everyone is now asking: how did Iran manage this? For years, it has been portrayed as a country under pressure, restricted from accessing advanced materials, finance, and technology. In theory, building such advanced nuclear capability alone under strict sanctions would be extremely difficult. That is why the intelligence community has struggled to explain how this progress happened in such a short period of time. The answer, according to emerging reports, points toward an unexpected and secret partnership that has operated far from public view. Behind closed doors, Iran is believed to have formed a deep technical cooperation with North Korea. On one side, North Korea brings years of experience in nuclear testing and missile development, built through decades of isolation and continuous weapons advancement. On the other side, Iran provides financial resources, particularly through oil revenues that move quietly through indirect trade routes despite sanctions. This exchange created a silent but powerful arrangement. Instead of relying on formal international systems, the cooperation reportedly bypassed global banking networks and traditional shipping methods. Specialized transfers, discrete routes, and indirect logistical channels were allegedly used to move both expertise and equipment between the two countries. It was not a public alliance, but a carefully hidden partnership operating beneath the surface of global surveillance. From the perspective of Western intelligence, this was never supposed to succeed at this scale. Yet now, the results appear to be visible, and they are forcing governments to reconsider everything they assumed about control, containment, and technological barriers. The situation has become a direct challenge to long-standing strategic expectations. Looking back, this also reframes earlier military actions in a very different light. There was a period when reports claimed that the United States had carried out airstrikes targeting Iranian nuclear-related facilities, using extremely powerful bombs designed to destroy underground infrastructure. At the time, official statements suggested that Iran's nuclear capabilities had been severely damaged and pushed back significantly. However, the reality now appears more complicated. Intelligence assessments later indicated that what was struck may not have been the core of the program. Instead, many of the visible facilities were likely decoys or surface-level structures designed to attract attention. Beneath them, deeper systems had already been moved and rebuilt in highly protected underground locations, shielded by layers of rock and engineering designed specifically to resist aerial penetration. This means that while surface damage may have looked significant, the essential components of the program may have continued operating elsewhere, hidden from direct observation. And in parallel, cooperation with North Korean specialists is believed to have helped accelerate the final stages of weapon development, particularly in adapting warheads for missile delivery systems. At this point, the situation is no longer viewed as a simple regional issue. It has evolved into a complex strategic problem involving miscalculation, hidden alliances, and the limits of surveillance technology. What once seemed contained has now entered a stage where every decision carries far greater consequences than before. And as this reality begins to settle in, global powers are being forced to confront a question they can no longer avoid. What happens when assumptions about control and delay no longer match the facts on the ground? Now the situation moves into a far more dangerous and uncertain phase, because what was once treated as a distant possibility is suddenly being weighed as a present reality inside decision-making rooms in Washington and across allied capitals. The entire strategic conversation has shifted from prevention to response, And that shift is where the tension becomes most visible. Inside intelligence briefings, the tone is described as unusually serious. Reports are being rechecked, satellite data is being reanalyzed, and multiple agencies are trying to confirm whether the nuclear assessment is fully accurate or partially overstated. Yet, even with internal debates, the core concern remains unchanged. If Iran truly possesses operational nuclear warheads, then the entire framework of deterrence in the Middle East has fundamentally changed. The United States now finds itself in a position where every possible move carries serious consequences. If it chooses to ignore the reports and avoid escalation, it risks accepting a new nuclear reality in the region, which would significantly reduce its strategic influence and weaken the credibility of its long-standing security commitments to regional allies. That alone would reshape alliances and force a recalculation of power across the Middle East. But if the response goes in the opposite direction, toward military action, the risks expand even further. This is no longer a scenario involving conventional weapons or limited strikes. The presence of nuclear capability changes the entire threshold of conflict. Any direct strike could trigger unpredictable retaliation patterns, not necessarily against the United States directly, but potentially against its regional bases or allied territories. That possibility alone introduces a level of uncertainty that military planners cannot ignore. This is where the dilemma becomes visible at the highest level of strategy. Decision makers are effectively trapped between two unstable outcomes. In one direction lies acceptance of a nuclear-armed Iran and a permanent shift in regional power balance. In the other direction lies escalation risk, where even a controlled operation could spiral into a much larger conflict with global consequences. At the same time, domestic pressure inside the United States adds another layer of complexity. Public opinion is not easily aligned behind new military engagements, especially with an adversary that is now believed to possess nuclear capability. Economic concerns, inflation, and internal political divisions make large-scale conflict far more difficult to justify. This creates a gap between strategic capability and political willingness. And that gap is shaping the current hesitation seen in official statements. Public messaging from Washington has therefore shifted into carefully measured language. Instead of direct threats or clear timelines, statements now emphasize concern, monitoring, and calls for diplomatic engagement. This is not accidental. It reflects a situation where escalation is possible but not desirable, and where every word is weighed for its potential global impact. Meanwhile, military posture in the region has quietly adjusted. Naval assets, air support units, and rapid deployment forces are being positioned in ways that signal readiness without immediate action. This type of positioning is often used to maintain leverage while avoiding direct confrontation. It is a form of pressure without crossing the line into open conflict, but it also increases the sensitivity of the entire region, where any small incident could escalate quickly. On the other side, regional allies are reacting with growing anxiety. For countries that have long relied on American security guarantees, the idea of a nuclear-armed Iran changes their entire security calculation overnight. Defensive systems that were once considered sufficient are now being reevaluated, and intelligence cooperation is intensifying as governments try to understand the full scale of the situation. At the same time, the broader international community is beginning to engage more actively. Diplomatic channels that were previously limited are now being reopened, and quiet negotiations are taking place behind closed doors. However, trust is extremely low. Previous agreements, especially those involving nuclear restrictions, have already been broken or withdrawn in the past, which makes any new arrangement far more difficult to establish. This breakdown of trust is one of the central obstacles. Even if a temporary agreement is proposed, neither side is fully confident that it would hold under long-term pressure. That uncertainty reduces the effectiveness of diplomacy and increases reliance on strategic deterrence instead. As a result, the entire system is now operating in a fragile balance. Military readiness is increasing, diplomatic activity is intensifying, and intelligence assessments are being continuously updated. Yet no single actor appears willing or able to fully control the direction of events. And as this tension builds, one underlying question continues to grow louder inside strategic circles. Is this situation still manageable through traditional diplomacy, Or has it already entered a phase where every option carries risks too large to fully contain? At this stage, the focus of global attention shifts toward a single geographical point that quietly controls much more than people usually realize: the Strait of Hormuz. It is not just a narrow waterway on the map, but one of the most critical energy corridors in the world. A significant portion of global oil supply passes through it every single day, which means any instability in this region does not remain local for long. It spreads outward, affecting energy prices, shipping routes, insurance markets, and ultimately the global economy. This is why even rumors of escalation in the area immediately trigger reactions across financial systems. Oil futures move within minutes. Shipping companies adjust risk calculations, and insurance premiums for maritime transport rise almost instantly. In this way, a regional security issue becomes a global economic signal. Markets do not wait for confirmation. They react to perception. Inside strategic analysis, this connection between military tension and financial movement is now treated as a central factor, not a secondary one. Decision makers are fully aware that even a small escalation could produce immediate inflationary pressure worldwide. Rising oil prices would not remain limited to energy sectors. They would affect transportation, manufacturing, and consumer goods, creating a chain reaction across multiple economies. At the same time, financial stability has become deeply tied to political stability. Governments are now forced to consider not only military outcomes, but also market responses. A sudden spike in energy prices could increase inflation, which in turn affects interest rates and borrowing costs. Rising bond yields signal tighter financial conditions, which then influence employment, investment, and overall economic growth. These interconnected effects mean that every geopolitical decision now carries an economic dimension that cannot be ignored. Because of this, modern strategy is no longer shaped by military logic alone. It is shaped by a combination of defense planning and financial sensitivity. Leaders are aware that even announcements or official statements can move markets significantly. A single press briefing can shift investor confidence, while uncertainty can lead to rapid capital movement across global markets. This is also why timing becomes extremely important. Strategic pauses, diplomatic windows, and negotiation periods are often viewed through multiple layers. On the surface, they appear to be diplomatic gestures aimed at reducing tension. But underneath, they also serve another purpose: allowing markets to stabilize, absorb information, and avoid sudden shocks that could spread instability beyond the region. In this context, even short timeframes take on greater meaning. A few days of delay in decision-making are not just administrative pauses. They are periods where governments, financial institutions, and military planners align their next steps. During these windows, intelligence reports are updated, economic indicators are monitored, and diplomatic messages are carefully coordinated. However, it is important to recognize that much of this interpretation remains analytical rather than confirmed fact. While it is true that global politics and financial systems are deeply connected, the idea of fully coordinated timing between military action and market cycles is often speculative and varies depending on perspective. Still, what cannot be ignored is the growing overlap between these systems. Military readiness, diplomatic signaling, and economic stability are no longer separate domains. They now operate as parts of a single environment where each action influences the others almost immediately. Within this environment, uncertainty itself becomes a powerful factor. Markets react not only to actions, but also to the possibility of actions. Military movements are therefore often interpreted as signals, even when no direct conflict is intended. A deployment can influence expectations just as strongly as a statement. This creates a situation where perception and reality begin to merge. Governments must manage not only what they do, but how what they do is interpreted globally. A misreading can lead to financial volatility, diplomatic tension, or unintended escalation. As tensions continue to build in the region, the Strait of Hormuz remains at the center of every calculation. It is both a physical choke point and a symbolic reminder of how interconnected modern systems have become. Any disruption there is no longer just a regional issue. It is a global event with immediate consequences. And as all these pressures accumulate, military, economic, and diplomatic, the world is left facing a difficult reality. The question is no longer just about what any single country will do next, but whether the current system can absorb this level of interconnected risk without breaking under its own weight. At this point, the situation reaches its most uncertain and sensitive stage, where every possible path forward carries consequences that are difficult to fully predict. What initially began as a regional tension has now expanded into a layered global problem involving military strategy, political credibility, economic stability, and international trust, all at the same time. Inside policy circles, one of the dominant concerns is that there is no longer a simple off-ramp that all parties can accept equally. Any attempt at de-escalation requires mutual confidence, and that confidence is now deeply damaged. Years of broken agreements, shifting policies, and inconsistent enforcement have created an environment where every side assumes the worst-case scenario of the other. For Iran, the core calculation is based on survival and deterrence. From their perspective, any agreement that reduces their strategic capability without permanent guarantees is seen as vulnerable to reversal. Past experiences where international deals were withdrawn or undermined have reinforced the belief that only tangible strategic assets provide real security. This is why the idea of giving up advanced capabilities in exchange for promises is no longer viewed as reliable. On the other side, the United States and its allies are dealing with a different kind of constraint. Even with significant military capability, the threshold for action has risen dramatically due to the risk of escalation. The presence of nuclear weapons changes the logic of conflict entirely. It is no longer about winning or losing a battle. It becomes about avoiding irreversible outcomes. That single factor places a strong limitation on direct intervention. This is why diplomatic language has become more prominent, even when tensions are high. Public statements emphasize caution, monitoring, and the possibility of negotiation, rather than immediate confrontation. Behind these statements, however, there's constant reassessment of intelligence, military positioning, and potential responses to worst-case scenarios. At the same time, regional allies are pushing for stronger action, driven by their own security concerns. For countries located closer to the center of potential conflict, the risks are more immediate. Their strategic calculations are shaped by geography, where even limited escalation could have direct consequences. This creates pressure on larger powers to provide reassurance even when the cost of action is high. However, global powers are also constrained by broader responsibilities. Large-scale conflict in this region would not remain contained. It would affect global energy markets, trigger economic shocks, and potentially disrupt international trade routes. These secondary effects are now considered just as important as the direct military outcomes. Because of this, decision-making has shifted into a slower, more cautious pattern. Instead of immediate responses, there are pauses, consultations, and layered discussions between intelligence agencies, military leadership, and economic advisors. Every possible action is evaluated not only for its strategic value, but also for its economic and political consequences. Meanwhile, public perception continues to evolve rapidly through media and online platforms. Narratives spread quickly, often mixing verified information with speculation. This creates a complex information environment where distinguishing confirmed facts from interpretation becomes increasingly difficult. Governments are aware of this dynamic and often adjust communication strategies accordingly. In this atmosphere, even small developments can take on larger symbolic meaning. A statement, a deployment, or even a delay in response can be interpreted in multiple ways depending on perspective. This adds another layer of instability, where perception itself becomes part of the strategic environment. Ultimately, the world now finds itself in a position where no single actor can fully control the direction of events. Each side has influence, but none has complete control. The system is highly interconnected, and every move triggers reactions across multiple domains simultaneously. And so the central question remains unresolved. Whether through diplomacy, deterrence, or continued pressure, the situation is now defined by uncertainty rather than clarity. The balance between escalation and restraint is extremely fragile, and even small changes could tilt it in either direction. This is where the narrative currently stands. A complex standoff shaped not just by military capability, but by history, economics, perception, and the limits of modern global power itself.